Good evening, or morning, or whatever time of the day it happens to be. Welcome, one, welcome all to the Writer's Black podcast. That's right, people. We are back in action. And this week, for our return episode, we are starting with a big, emotionally charged episode. I am sitting down with Christine Kuehn and Mark Schiponi, the husband and wife duo behind Family of Spies, a World War II story of Nazi espionage, betrayal, and the secret history of Pearl Harbor. This book is a true story full of all kinds of historical documents and facts, all stemming from Christine's revelation of her own familial ties to the Nazi Party. We'll talk about how Christine and Mark came together to really dive into the research component of this subject long before the book was even a gleam in anyone's eye, coming to terms with familial guilt from the sins of days long past, and just so many fascinating things that they learned along this 22-year journey from the discovery to publishing this book. If you're enjoying the Writer's Black podcast, please consider subscribing or following along on your podcasting platform of choice. We're on Spotify, we're on Apple Podcasts, we're on YouTube now. We now have a YouTube channel where you can check out the RSS feeds, as well as the video versions of our episodes. Let us know how we're doing in the comments below. And if you want to go the extra mile, you can follow us over on our Patreon. We are at Writers Black Pod on Patreon, as well as on YouTube. Also our TikTok, Instagram, and Facebooks. We're just all over the place. You can keep up to date with everything that we're doing. All right, housekeeping out of the way. Let's get into this conversation about Family of Spies with Christine and Mark. So you two are both journalists or former journalists. You've worked very closely together in your research for this book, Family of Spies, for literal decades at this point. You've been all over the place talking to different people about the book. One individual who has been nice enough to help promote the book is an Instagram user by the name of @YourTuckerTime.
Oh, yes.
What was the, I guess kind of starting off with like a little bit of a softball, what was the genesis for your Pup Tucker's social media platform, and how has that experience been creatively for you guys?
Well, it's funny because I didn't have really much presence on Instagram, and I wasn't really comfortable putting myself out there, but I can put my dog out there. And so it was just a way, I love editing when I do his videos, and I love being creative and putting things to music. So it was just a creative outlet for me when I first started his account.
Greg, the dog's gotten such a big head now with his 10,000 followers that sometimes he'll just lock himself in the trailer and not come out. It's hard for us to deal with him sometimes.
You can't work under these conditions.
No. Always looking for treats for walks. It's incredible.
That'll happen. Before we do the whole deep dive into Family of Spies, can you both share a little bit about the family secret that steered you onto this path? And how does one cope with such a massive revelation?
It really started with the tidbit that we knew from her grandfather's story, which was he was the only person tried and convicted for the bombing of Pearl Harbor. So it started with that. It was not supposed to be a book. We just looked at that information and said, like, well, let's find out more about this. This is incredible. And as we did more research, each tidbit became more compelling and crazy than the last. It's like, oh my gosh, the family were devout Nazis. Oh my gosh, your grandfather actually interviewed for the head of the Gestapo. Oh my gosh, your Aunt Ruth had an affair with Joseph Goebbels. So it just kept going, and we kept finding all these incredible bits of her family history that made us stop and think we need to really do a comprehensive dive on this and make sure we've got all the information correct.
But I didn't know anything about this, right? It was in 1994 when I received a letter. Mark and I were married, 2 young kids. We were living outside of DC. And I received this letter from a screenwriter talking about, my grandfather and his involvement with the Nazi Party and the fact that he had spied for the Japanese. And I was just confused. I had no understanding of what he was talking about. And back then, there was no Google, there was no Hey Siri. So we went to Borders Books, and we started looking in the World War II section and diving into books, trying to understand and locate anything that we could find out about my grandfather. We started finding him in a number of different books. The first one was At Dawn We Slept, which is a great history book on Pearl Harbor, but we actually found all these stories about, my grandfather and my Aunt Ruth leading the attack on Pearl Harbor, telling the Japanese where to bomb and when to bomb. And it was just they were all fantastical. Those ended up being totally exaggerated stories of what happened.
But they're supposed to be signaling through a dormer window in the attic of their house is how they were
Yeah.
relaying the information to in real time to the Japanese, attack.
And so, and after that, I came home and I still didn't want to be connected to this family. So I went to the Mormon temple and I researched their genealogy. They had a huge genealogy library, and I was able to find the lineage from my grandfather down to me. So I went home and immediately called my father. And I was like, hey, Dad, got this letter, told him everything, and he was like, "Oh no, that can't be us. They have to have the wrong Kuehns." And I was like, "Okay." And I hung up the phone and I wasn't sure what to do with that because obviously he wasn't telling me the truth. And so I sat there and trying to figure out what my next step was, and he called me back and he was sobbing, and it was first time I'd ever really seen my dad cry like that since my mom had passed away. I don't even think I saw him cry like that when my mom passed away, but he first words out of his mouth were I wanted to shield you from all of that. And over the next hour he finally worked through. I mean, he would stop and start because he was sobbing and trying to catch his breath. And he finally told me the hidden truth about his family that he had kept secret from me for most of my life.
So once the cat was out of the bag, then what was the plan? I mean, how soon after the discovery, did you guys decide to pursue storytelling? And was it always going to be a book, or was it going to be an article at some point, or was another medium on the table?
Well, that was 30 years. It was a long time, because I was really embarrassed and ashamed of what I was learning. And, I would look and find out some of the information that about my family and their involvement, and I would pack everything away because I just couldn't handle what I was learning. And then another researcher or someone writing a book would reach out. Maybe they have a little bit of additional information I hadn't had, and it would start it all over again. It wasn't until 2020 that we actually even decided to make it a book. One of the one of the blurbs on the back is from Stephen Harding, and he is a best-selling author, historian, and he reached out to me because he was researching the family about writing a book. And I, after a few days, I called him back and I said, you know what? We're going to write the book. It's my family's story. Mark's going to help me. We're going to do this together, and we're going to write the book. And he was like, great. And he sent me all his information. Some of it we had, some of it we didn't. He gave us some tips on how to research and, how to get a Freedom of Information Act and how to, navigate the National Archives. And because it was the first time we had ever done anything this extensive. And we set off and, wasn't really sure what it was going to be, but we were putting it together, and we're really kind of amazed that it's done what it's done so far.
I'm curious. You guys were both journalists. You mentioned that this was a lot more research than you'd ever done before. Like on a scale of 1 to 10, what was the difference like in terms of the research you did on your other projects and then with this book?
Yeah, I mean, being a journalist, we're both in television, you're telling your story in a minute, 15 seconds and a lead in, right? So you got to get in, say it, get out. This was a whole different process. There was so much information. The FBI files alone were 800 pages of documents and memos from J. Edgar Hoover and President Roosevelt about her grandfather. So you have to go through each of those. You got to gather it all, then find out what makes sense, what doesn't, what you need, what you don't need. Books are going to be contradicting some of this information, so you have to figure out what's real and what's not. And separating the wheat from the chaff was really a big chunk of it. So it's a whole different process.
Mark, so throughout all of this, you've clearly been supportive of your wife and this whole thing. Um, how soon, I guess, did you jump on board with the research component? Like getting in, even back before it was going to be a book, just kind of helping figure this out. How involved were you in those early like deep dives into things?
Yeah, it depends on what piece of information it was. I mean, Chrissy had a lot of gathering from and really spent a lot of time finding her relatives in Germany, and that took a long time. She did a lot of reaching out to the archives in Hawaii and things like that. So about it in 2020, the first step was really the archives because we didn't know what information was in there. So that's when it really the research started in earnest as far as okay, we need to have a beginning, middle, and end of this thing rather than just hey, here's some more information about your family. Let's figure out where it goes.
When you think about how we did the research and how we worked together, I look at it as I was like kind of the emotional piece. So I would talk with the family, find the family, pull that together. When we would learn about the different things that my family had done, it was about that emotional side of it. But Mark's very analytical. And so when we did a lot of the research of the history, and putting that together, he was really able to lean in and we were able to kind of compare the stories and really take my journey along with the history of the Nazi Party, the rise of it, how my family fit in, and kind of how we were able to pull that together to do all that. I mean, the archives are very daunting. I mean, there's all kinds of guidelines. You can't take paper in, you don't take pictures. You really have to follow a lot of rules. And it was 800 pages. And there were memos in there from J. Edgar Hoover and memos to President Roosevelt, photos. There were some photos in there. So it was just a lot of work that we had to do to decipher. And there was even conflicting information in the archives. One FBI report would say one thing and another one about the same situation would say something different. So you had to kind of really dive in to try and figure out which one of those was most feasible.
And there are, Greg, I will say there's, to speak to your point about emotions, probably the two biggest tidbits that we found that really sent Chrissy into a place where she said, I don't want to do this story anymore. The first one was her relatives in Germany. Her she met one of Leopold, who was her dad's older brother, the devout Nazi. His grandson Knut sent a picture, and it is Leopold's wedding day, and it's the wedding photo. And next to him is this his bride in a beautiful white dress, and he is standing next to her in his full Nazi regalia, and he's got the swastika on his arm and a dagger hanging from his belt. And at that point, Chrissy just looked and said, I don't want to do this anymore. Because, before that, it had just been words on paper. This kind of brought it into black and white in front of us. Oh my gosh, this is a real person and they're really doing this. And the other piece was finding out her Aunt Ruth, who we met in 1987. We found a book and she was in the world's 30 greatest women spies right next to Mata Hari. And we harkened back to the meeting with her in 1987 where we have tea and cookies and she's a sweet little old lady. And it's hard to reconcile those two visions of this same person. Suddenly she's now this femme fatale super spy. And so there were some certainly very big emotional stopping points along the way.
Christine, obviously this changed a lot when you learned about a lot about your childhood, a lot about your life. Looking back, how do you think it shaped, like this revelation shaped the way that you understand trust and identity as an adult?
Yeah, that is a really good question. Because I was a little frustrated when, I first found out, that my dad had kept this secret from me. And over time, I started to realize that he was one of those dads. He told all kinds of stories. He was a huge storyteller, and he would make up some fantastical stories. I mean, there's one in the book about Shirley Temple, and he used to tell me about how he played with Shirley Temple, and I believed it when I was young. But as I got older, I started to realize he's probably making up some of these stories. Some of these are not true. And I even though the Shirley Temple one I think actually ended up being true, to be honest. But I felt like he would choose very carefully what he would tell me. And so once I really discovered the history and started really understanding how hard this was on my father. He was considered to be just as dangerous to national security by the FBI as his parents. And he was 15 years old and he hadn't done anything.
And I mean, that was we're not just saying that, that was in a memo that the FBI sent that said, like, we're keeping him locked up in the internment camp for that reason.
Exactly. And so I think he never really got over that. And I think for him, it was easier to tell about his wonderful childhood, that he lived in Hawaii and he spent his days on the beach, because that was easier than telling me what his family had done. And I understand that. I understand how difficult it must have been to to put that out there. to me when he was really just trying to start over and live his life. I mean, he walked away from his family when he was 15 and he never saw his mother again. He never saw his younger brother again. And he actually never saw his father again after he left to go to Buenos Aires. And I think it was 1946,
When he 1948 he left. Yeah,
1948 when he
but
left.
yeah, when you
So,
think about her dad, I mean, here's a kid who's locked in an internment camp because he's considered dangerous to national security. The FBI is questioning him over and over. He's actually brought over from Sand Island, which is where the internment was, tank camp was in the Honolulu harbor, and he's brought over with POW number one, who was a mini sub captain who was captured, and they're going over in the same boat, both prisoners. And her dad's thinking that the government thinks I'm as dangerous as this guy who came over in a sub trying to kill military personnel from America. So it had to be a hard thing for him to reconcile and come to peace with, for sure.
We tend in society, I guess now, we tend to kind of glamorize the espionage and the spy genres. You have your James Bonds that everyone knows for sure. For you, how important was it to untangle, I guess, the stereotype, for lack of a better word, with the reality of the story?
Well, I'll say you mentioned James Bond to start that. So part of the craziness of this story, again, it was one crazy thing after another. We found out that a double agent named Disco Popoff, who was the inspiration behind James Bond, Ian Fleming's James Bond, was sent over to the States to set up a spy ring. And then he was supposed to go to Hawaii and replace her grandfather as the spy over there. So, there was many layers of the spying. As far as the question about, spying, we found out through this was it's not necessarily weaving your way through a laser beam field to get to a safe and break in and find documents and then
not
sprint.
jumping out of
Right.
airplanes,
But there are sharks with laser beams in their heads, right?
Yeah.
It's a long game. The Japanese, and this is a 6 year period that the family was there with little tidbits of information and gleaning something here, something there, a picture here, and it was all kind of plotted in, and it painted a picture that the Japanese used to attack.
Do you guys, maybe favorite's not the right word, but in your research, was there a piece of information that I guess stood out to you as like the most out there thing, the most light bulb moment, or maybe even like a historical favorite fact that you unearthed, I guess, in your research?
Well, from a family standpoint, it was when I realized that Ruth was half Jewish. I mean, I didn't find that out early on. I found that out later in the research when I found um, a document that I actually used Google Translate to read, and it said that she was half Jewish. And then when I went to Berlin and met Lisa, my dad's first cousin, and one of the first words out of her mouth was, "Well, Ruth was half Jewish." And I said, "I do." And she goes, "Well, we think that's why the family disappeared." And so it's like all these things just kind of click. So from a family perspective, that was really, really like, kind of turned the story around for me. I don't know about from a historical. What do you think?
For the historical, and I felt a little embarrassed I didn't know this, but the Nazis were voted into power. They were elected. They were some floundering party throughout the 20s with 3% of the national
Mhm.
vote. And then once the stock market crashed and sent the world into a depression, the Nazis took advantage, and that's when they started promising we're going to bring Germany back to its rightful place in the world order, and people started buying into that. And they went from nobody to being voted in, and then eventually taking over as the leading party in the Reichstag. And that to me was the most unbelievable part of it. And so I thought, okay, well, I'm just dumb. But as we've done these talks and gone out there, and people have responded to after they've read the book, they're like, God, I didn't know that the Nazis were voted into power. I thought they just strong-armed their way in. So there's little things like that shouldn't be mind-blowing, and any historian from World War II would know that, very quickly. But I think the common person doesn't necessarily know some of those little tidbits of history that are shocking when you see them.
So 2020, you said, is when you officially started the book project. How long from that point on until completion did it take? And then what was it like finding a publisher for the book?
Yeah, that was interesting. I think it took us about 3 years to write the book, between researching and writing and writing again. If you've written a book, you do go back and rework it. And then we get into the editing process. We had some key people read the original versions and give us feedback so that we could, massage it and put it into a format that we really wanted it. I wanted it to read like historical fiction. I wanted it to be a history book that my book club would pick up and read and love and learn something from. So that was kind of where we're trying to get to. So it took a couple versions to get to that. Finding a publisher is not easy. To get to one of the top five, you have to have an agent to actually even put your book in front of any of the top five. So, it was just a long process, and we interviewed with a couple of different publishers, and we ended up going with Celadon. I really connected with the editor there, Ryan Doherty, and he was just great. And he had a vision, and I think his vision was aligned with our vision and my vision. And so, that's how we made our choice.
What do you think? What do you hope that readers will take away from this book, specifically with people who grew up in families where maybe things just weren't talked about?
Yeah, I mean, I hope a few different things. I really hope to begin with that someone that may not know history or maybe hadn't learned it or forgotten it actually learn something about history and about what happened in World War II and how the Nazi Party came to be. And maybe it'll inspire them to do some of their own research. On a personal note, I hope that anyone that finds out a secret that they're ashamed of or something about their grandparents or past generations that really are difficult for them to come to terms with, realize that we we are not a reflection of our past generations. We don't have to carry the sins of our father. We have the opportunity to make our own path, make our own imprint on this world, and really look to the future and be who we want to be. And that's something that, you thought I would have learned that in writing the book, but I really learned it in all the speaking that I've been doing after the book's launched. I've been talking to a lot of Jewish community groups around the country, and I was really nervous about that. I was afraid of what they would think, and they all have been extremely warm and kind, and have every group I've spoken to, at least two or three people have come up and said, "You are not your grandparents. You are your own person. You can make your own choices." And I think that that kindness and that warmth has really helped me, you know, put the shame and guilt away. I mean, it still comes up. I mean, I still feel that way, but it helps me kind of move forward and feel a little bit more comfortable in my own skin a little bit.
This project clearly brought you two closer together over the decades of being there for each other and trying to figure this mystery out, and leading to all of this success now. What's next for you two, do you think?
Well, we've got, it's funny, once you're out there and people see, oh, you wrote a book. Well, now people are kind of parachuting in with like, here's my story, here's my story. So we've been lucky enough where we've been able to look at different things. And we've landed on one. It's an insane story about this 14-year-old kid in Poland who escaped several Nazi ghettos. Uh, Auschwitz, he escaped by hiding in the tire of a B-52 bomber. At Mauthausen right before the SS was about to blow it up. So it is this incredible story, and there's so many stories like that out there that you want to pick ones that differentiate themselves somehow. There's lots of tales of surviving the Holocaust, which people didn't just sit there and survive it; they had to fight. But here's someone who fought to escape as a kid several times. So that's what we're working on right now.
And then I guess wrapping things up, we've talked about your dad, Christy, his incredible storytelling ability. What is your favorite tale, like individually, that your dad has told?
Oh, he loved alligator stories. I'm not going to say those are my favorite, but I think those were his favorite. I would have to say it's the Shirley Temple story. So when I was little, I was watching a Shirley Temple movie, and my dad came up and he was like, "Well, I played with Shirley Temple when I lived in Hawaii." And I was like, at the time I was pretty young. I was like, "Oh wow, Shirley Temple! I loved her." And then as I got older, and he would retell this story about meeting Shirley Temple and playing with Shirley Temple. Well, I was like, yeah, that probably didn't happen. But then when we were doing our research, we found this old movie tone, and we were looking through it, and it was about Shirley Temple and her visit to Hawaii and how she had taken ukulele lessons and Waikiki and swam in Waikiki, and then gone over to the windward side of the island, which is where my grandparents live with my father, and how she had gone to a party and with all the local children over there, and it was all these pictures, and there was this tall young boy, probably I
It
don't
was
know,
video.
it was video.
Right,
Yeah,
video.
some of them were photos though,
Okay,
right?
sure.
So it was a tall, but it was this young boy, probably 10, 11, 12, blonde hair, blue eyes, and it is resembled my father completely. And then there was another young boy in the pictures, that was probably about the age of Hans. And so, I can't prove that that was them. There's no names or anything, but I've looked at those pictures a lot, and I think, wow, that was a story that was probably true, that he told me about his childhood, that I chose not to believe, and in the end, I think it was probably one of them that was actually a true story. So yeah, that's probably my favorite.
Well, I think the one that really, this is what I thought you were going to tell,
Hmm.
was when her niece was probably 5.
Hmm.
She had learned O Tannenbaum in school. So the whole family's gathered around the Christmas tree, and she is singing O Tannenbaum, and
In
Eberhard
German.
in German, right? And Chrissy's dad starts crying. And, they're not used to seeing him cry. And at the end of it, he walked over and he picked her up in his arms and just was hugging her, and tears are rolling down his face. And Chrissy and her brothers and sisters kind of looked like, what is going on? And he didn't explain it. He didn't, say, well, it reminded me of my childhood in Germany. But, there were little tidbits of information that he kind of put out there that made it almost more secretive because he didn't explain why he was reacting that way. So that would be my favorite one because it kind of leads into this whole, well, here's another mystery. Why is he crying at O Tannenbaum, right? So,
Well, guys, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast today. For anyone who's interested in finding the book or keeping up with you guys, maybe online, where can people go for more information?
Well, you can buy the book at, Barnes and Noble, Amazon. I really, encourage people to go by your local bookstore and talk to the book owners, because they have some additional information, and they're always great to talk about. I have a Instagram. It's my personal Instagram, cks.collective, where I post about where I'm speaking or some of my speaking engagements, so you can find out information there. Really, I challenge everyone to Google. We have it now. Google and go and find out, what you want to know about World War II, because it is such an incredible period of time. And so you can kind of go and learn and maybe find some information you didn't know before. Thank you for
appreciate it.
having us,
Thanks for your
Brett.
time.
Thank you once again to Christine and Mark for joining us on the Writer's Black podcast this week. Guys, please go check out Family of Spies, a World War II story of Nazi espionage, betrayal, and the secret history behind Pearl Harbor. A lot of love and care was clearly put into compiling this book, especially right now with everything else going on in the world. I think everyone should check out this book. On the next episode of the podcast, we're sitting down with Steve Barry to talk about the 20th entry in his Cotton Malone series, The Devil's Bible. Can you believe that 20 books in the series? That is astounding. And we're going to talk just all about his wonderful career. Please make sure you're following along on Spotify, Apple Podcast, YouTube, or just your podcast platform of choice, so you can get that episode when it comes out. Or if you want it one day early, you can follow us over on Patreon. That is patreon.com/writersblackpod. One final thank you to Christine and Mark for being a part of the podcast this week. Until next time, gang, I've been Greg, you've been awesome, and keep writing.